Welcome back to Behind the Line podcast. Today we're talking about the federal officer shooting in Minneapolis and the fallout in Portland, Oregon, and the all too predictable explosion of outrage that followed. Politicians, media personalities, and social media experts are already screaming for justice before facts, before investigations, before the law even has a chance to speak. Here's the problem. Most of the loudest voices weighing in have never worn a badge, never worked in emergency services, never made a split-second decision where hesitation could get someone killed. But they're absolutely confident telling you who's guilty and what punishment should be handed down. That's not how the system is supposed to work. In an era of body cameras, surveillance, and instant viral outrage, calm and restraint have been replaced by political theater. Careers are built on clicks, power is gained by inflaming emotions, and facts get buried unless they fit the narrative. I've been involved in an officer shooting myself, one ruled justified by an independent state agency, one that was very similar to the situation in Minneapolis. So I'm not speaking from a keyboard. I'm speaking from experience. And today we're going to break this down the way it should have been from the start, through the lens of law, policy, and constitutional standards. Not feelings, not politics, not mob pressure. We'll talk about federal use of force policy, what the law actually allows, why jumping to conclusions is dangerous, and how politicians on both sides are exploiting these incidents to divide the public while nothing ever truly changes. This isn't red versus blue, it's facts versus outrage, and we're going to stay behind the line.
Dramatic video purportedly shows the moment an ICE agent fatally opened fire on a woman in Minneapolis, who DHS says attempted to barrel her SUV into the path of an officer. As multiple angles of the incident have emerged and gone viral across the internet, users are left divided on whether or not the agent's actions were reckless or in self-defense. In the footage, ICE officers order the driver out of the vehicle after she blocked the path of their truck. But as one of the agents attempts to open the door, she quickly throws the car into reverse before trying to speed forward in the direction of another agent in her path. After the vehicle narrowly misses the agent, he fires 3 shots before the car crashes into a white sedan parked nearby on the side of the street.
That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you. Show your face. I'm not mad at you. That's okay. We don't change our plates every morning, just so you know. It'll be the same plate when you come talk to us later. That's fine. U.S. citizen. You want to come at us? You want to come at us? I say go get yourself some lunch, big boy. Go ahead.
Out of the car. Get out of the car. Get out of the car.
Whoa!
Good.
So we're weighing in on the recent federal officer shooting that occurred in Minneapolis. Of course, there is a plethora of opinions out there. Citizens, politicians, law enforcement people, news media, all the armchair experts. A lot of people who have never worked in law enforcement or emergency services. A lot of people who have never experienced the stress that comes with that job and what it's like to make a split-second life or death decision. A lot of people who never really faced any real adversity in their lives at all. A lot of milquetoast, soybean, you know the type. But they got opinions. They know. What really needs to happen in this age of cameras, surveillance, and social media is people need to be calm and see what the investigation leads to. They need to keep their mouths shut. I had a shooting very similar to this when I was in law enforcement, so I feel like I have some relevant experience to this situation. A shooting that was ruled justified by a state agency. I see some people saying the officer shouldn't have put himself in front of her car, that he created the situation, and while I agree that law enforcement officers should not put themselves in situations where they can be run over, or hanging off cars, or drugged down the street, etc., etc., you also have to accept the simple truth that citizens should not be putting themselves in the middle of law enforcement operations. It's inherently dangerous. You don't have all the facts as to what is happening, and you just plain don't belong there. Just because you may not agree with it or what they're doing does not give you the right to interfere. That is at least currently, when they're doing something that is at least currently legal. Had she not put herself in this situation in the first place, this never would have happened. You have a bunch of politicians who have been fanning the flames of dissent and revolt for months. Every time you pull up social media, you have the usual idiots running their mouths about it. You should be angry or outraged over this or that. Every single day, amping up the population, creating these dangerous situations all around the country. Politicians and media who are looking for clicks and views and attention, gaslighting a certain segment of the population. You have overweight governors and milquetoast mayors cussing and talking big at press conferences like it's some kind of WWE event and they're about to throw down. It's seriously laughable. And yet it seems to be working. It doesn't matter if she was a mom or a good person or anything else. If you interject yourself into a situation you should have never been in the first place, there quite likely could be consequences. I know consequences is a foreign term to a lot of people these days, but as we have seen, there are consequences for your actions. If you want to protest, by all means protest, but do it in a safe place. At a place where anyone with a lick of common sense would understand makes sense. Not right in the middle of whatever the cops are doing with your camera out in their face making comments. People are far too emotional now, letting rational thought and decision making go right out the window. The Minnesota governor, old Tim Walz, even said he was going to activate the National Guard. Really? For what purpose? Of course, later he said this would be to assist his law enforcement people, but he sure made it sound like he was going to use them to go deal with ICE agents. At least that's the impression I got when he was rootin' and tootin' about that. Waltz's demeanor and language sounds seditious. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz said that he has issued a warning order to prepare the Minnesota National Guard after a woman was fatally shot by Immigration and Customs Enforcement officer in Minneapolis on Wednesday morning. To Minnesotans on the National Guard, they're here to protect you and protect your constitutional rights, Walz said. These are our neighbors. They don't wear masks. They don't bust in from somewhere else. They're not here to cause hassles to you or what we saw today, the tragedy. The governor called on Americans to come together to confront the Trump administration's immigration crackdown in cities across the country. And I quote, "To Americans who are watching this, if you're in Portland, or you're in LA, or you're in Chicago, or you're wherever, they're coming next. Stand with us," Walz said. Stand with us against this. Those are really troubling comments from a governor. I mean, it sounds like he's calling for violence, doesn't it? Whatever's necessary. That's the impression I get. Now, as if Waltz called it, though, you have the two shot in Portland, Oregon by Border Patrol the next day. This was during a targeted traffic stop of an illegal Venezuelan who were purported to be TDA gang members. So, not Oregonians, not even Americans. Violent criminal gang members. Surprisingly, the Portland police chief, his response was good and intelligent. We are still in the early stages of this incident, said Portland Police Chief Bob Day in a statement. We understand the heightened emotion and tension many are feeling in the wake of the shooting in Minneapolis, but I am asking the community to remain calm as we work to learn more. And he's absolutely correct. No one should jump to any conclusions. An investigation needs to play out, which is the way it should have been handled in Minneapolis. Instead, it's turned into a circus. Of course, the Portland mayor and Oregon governor responded as expected. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek remarked on Thursday evening news conference, "We are standing here today united as a state, wanting peace and safety in our communities. We are all shaken and outraged by another terrible, unnecessary, violent event instigated by the reckless agenda of the Trump administration." Does she know the details of this shooting and why it happened? No, she does not. But she speaks as if she does. She speaks as if it was unnecessary, right? This time in our own state, in our largest city, coming just one day after the tragedy in Minnesota, while the death details of the incident remain limited, but she's already formulated her opinion and judgment. One thing is very clear: when a president endorses tearing families apart and attempts to govern through fear and hate rather than shared values, you foster an environment of lawlessness and recklessness. Trust is essential to maintaining community safety and the rule of law. Federal agents at the direction of the Department of Homeland Security are shattering trust. They are hurting people, and they are destroying day by day what we hold dear. Our sense of safety and our literal safety are severely undermined by what happened this afternoon in Portland. I'm so thankful that no one died and more people weren't hurt. The Attorney General and other leaders have been clear about our concerns with the excessive use of force by federal agents in Portland, and today's incident only heightens the need for transparency and accountability. Oregonians deserve clear answers, and I am aligned with the mayor. The priority right now is a full, completed investigation, not more detentions. My message to the federal government is this: we demand transparency. We demand your cooperation with Portland Police and the Multnomah County DA, because we need to investigate this incident efficiently and effectively so we can rebuild trust with our nation's government. There are those who want to cause chaos, but Oregonians know how to stand up and speak out peacefully. We must remain united in peaceful opposition to efforts to tear our community apart. We must not turn against each other. We must stand neighbor to neighbor. We must not take the bait. And I want to end by saying I'm grateful to the first responders who have been managing this incident here today in Portland, and we stand united with Americans across our country and with Minneapolis and Minnesota in light of these troubling events. Portland Mayor Keith Wilson, via a press release, just one day after the horrific violence in Minnesota at the hands of federal agents, our community here in Portland is now grappling with another deeply troubling incident. Earlier this afternoon, 2 people were shot and injured by federal agents in the Hazelwood neighborhood. We cannot sit by while constitutional protections erode and bloodshed mounts. Portland is not a training ground for militarized agents, and the full force threatened by the administration has deadly consequences. As mayor, I call on ICE to end all operations in Portland until a full investigation can be completed. Federal militarization undermines effective community-based public safety, and it runs counter to the values that define our region. I will use every legal and legislative tool available to protect our residents' civil and human rights. I call on every Portlander to represent our values and show up with calm and purpose during this difficult time. Portland does not respond to violence with violence. We respond with clarity, unity, and a commitment to justice. We must stand together to protect Portland. The city of Portland will continue to provide updates as they become available. We are grateful to our first responders for their support of the victims. And that was his statement. And from the Oregon Senate Majority Leader, Case Jama, and Representatives Andrea Valderrama and Lamar Wisejoint, they had a statement via news release. Let's be clear. The violence carried out today by federal agents in Portland is a predictable escalation of the lawlessness and recklessness we have seen from the Trump administration. Federal agents opened fire in the Hazelwood neighborhood. That is not public safety. It is a dangerous and unacceptable use of force by a federal agency operating without accountability. Do they know the situation of the shooting, or why it happened, or why the officer felt the need to shoot? Why is a politician behind a desk in an office far away making comments about whether it's justified or not before any details have been released? We stand in solidarity with all Portlanders seeking justice. Our communities are not collateral damage. Residents should not have to fear armed federal agents escalating violence in their neighborhoods. This incident reflects a broader pattern, an administration that prioritizes intimidation over constitutional rights, violence over public safety, and suffering over human dignity. This was an abuse of power, plain and simple. It's not so plain and simple, Mrs. Politician. We stand with the mayor of Portland and demand that federal agents immediately cease terrorizing neighborhoods in our city and that these actions are fully investigated. Portland does not consent to federal agents bringing violence into our neighborhoods. Of course, it was a long list of politicians lining up to give their 2 cents. It always is. Most of these people are career politicians. They've never done any type of real work in their lives. Calling it an unacceptable abuse of power, unacceptable use of force. These people don't even know what happened, why shots were fired. They're just gaslighting for the sake of getting an emotional response from the public. And unfortunately, the public at large is all too anxious to get emotional. Let's look at the federal use of force policy. The U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is part of the Department of Homeland Security. Its agents follow DHS-wide use of force policy with ICE-specific layered on top. Core legal standard ICE uses the same constitutional standard as other federal agencies, based on some Supreme Court cases. Graham versus Connor, 1989, and Tennessee versus Garner, 1985, judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer at the moment. Force is used. Deadly force is a last resort, but not restricted to armed suspects only. ICE officers may use deadly force when they reasonably believe it is necessary to protect themselves or others from an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, or prevent the escape of a person who poses an imminent threat or death or serious bodily injury to others, and whose escape cannot be safely prevented by other means. Deadly force may be justified even if the subject is unarmed. The threat to third parties, not to the officer. The officer is outnumbered. The officer is operating in protective or high-risk enforcement contexts. Deadly force does not require the subject to fire a weapon, the subject to strike first, the officer to retreat. It does not require the officer to retreat. Verbal warnings when feasible. De-escalation efforts when time and safety permit. However, if issuing a warning would increase danger, it is not required. This is critical in a rapidly evolving or close quarters situation. Firearm use rules. You may not fire warning shots. You may not fire solely to protect property. You must fire only to stop the threat, not to punish or retaliate. Any use of deadly force triggers an immediate supervisory notification, internal investigation with the DHS Office of Inspector General, possibly the Department of Justice, to review for civil rights implications. And these same rules applied to the Ashley Babbitt situation, which is why that officer was not prosecuted. He was outnumbered. She wasn't armed. When they look at this policy and compare it to those Supreme Court cases that I talked about, they have to ask themselves if they would be able to prosecute. And if they can't, then there is no case. The bottom line on this deadly force policy boils down to this. If a reasonable officer believes someone poses an immediate threat of death or serious bodily harm, deadly force is legally authorized. Even if the person is unarmed and even if the threat is to others. That's the same legal backbone used across federal law enforcement. Clearly, the Minneapolis incident is within the federal use of force policy. So all the gaslighting is for nothing other than to get you angry. No charges, if they're brought, are going to stick. There isn't enough information about the Portland event to really comment on that. I know it's pointless to try to explain this to the raving lunatic media, the politicians and citizens who are frothing at the mouth to see justice, to see police officers prosecuted, to put the screws to the federal government. And there's plenty that I don't like about the federal government and the direction we're going. But I don't support lawless behavior. I don't support blue cities and states refusing to prosecute and incarcerate criminals that make our communities less safe every day. I don't support politicians who have only ever sat at a desk and worry more about criminals' rights than taxpayers, families, and our safety. Politicians who are raping us for every tax dollar they can to pay for all their free programs that support criminals and drug users. They have absolutely no right to preach to anyone about public safety. None. I cover this every week. The amount of crime and the revolving door that is the so-called criminal justice system occurring in blue cities, specifically on the West Coast. So all this to say what? What's going to change? Whether you agree with this or not, nothing ever changes, in case you haven't noticed. It doesn't matter what party is in control. Sure, maybe some small changes are made here and there, but all the big promises, the pie in the sky, so to speak, that all politicians spew out, never happens. We as a whole need to stop trusting politicians. This shouldn't be red versus blue, it should be us versus them. This is just another convenient event to drive a wedge further between American people, to encourage more anger, more dissolution, more rage, and more hate. Your politicians are pushing that. Politicians on both sides of the aisle. Also, conveniently, I bet we won't hear another word about the Somali daycare scandals. Epstein is going to fall a little farther off the news cycle, too. We'll probably send another $1 trillion to Israel and Ukraine, or maybe we'll invade Greenland while you're focused on this shit show in Minnesota and Oregon. All this stuff happening, whether planned or not, will distract you from the fraud and illegal activity going on every day. Just remember, no crisis should go to waste.